Well, today we're going to cover several topics. First, the story from Denise Loining with LBRW Cattle Company and using software that helps them efficiently develop their young bulls, from tracking feed, both inventory and what is fed, to also health records with their veterinarian.
So it allows our team, if you will, to have a really good picture of what's happening in this development season of these bulls.
Then RMA Administrator Marcia Bunger will be joining us to talk about a new risk management tool for cow-calf producers.
It was a gap that we saw, and fortunately, a private submitter was able to formulate a policy and bring it through the.
And finally, I'll bring to you a recap of the fall run and how that calf market is progressing as we review early October numbers. And then finally, Don Day joining us as we take a look at our long-term weather. All of this on today's episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And this is the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. We're glad to have you tuned in and saddled up for today's show. We do have a lot to cover, as you heard there in the opening, and excited to bring that to you. Don't forget, if you're out and listening on the radio and you missed something in today's show, or you want to go back and listen to previous shows. In fact, I'm referencing when we get to talking about the markets later on, I do reference the show we had a couple of weeks ago, episode 137 with Clint Berry, entitled "You Can Smell It Coming," an outlook on the fall cattle market. You can go back and listen to those shows by going to our podcast website at workingranchradio.com or any podcast provider out there. Now, speaking of previous shows, go back and listen to last week's show. A great show that we had an interview with Tim Sheehy, who is a former Navy SEAL, now turned businessman, rancher as well. They're selling branded beef products. They're also in his ranch in Montana, also working with combat veterans to work on their ranch and get them skills that they're learning there. Great interview there, and he's also running for U.S. Senate in Montana, which is a hot seat in the country, no doubt about that. Well, before we get too far, let's say a quick thanks to our sponsors today of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Vitalix, livestock is your livelihood. Tubs are our expertise. Vitalix, the true blue tub. Find out more at Vitalix.com. And Performance Beef. Performance Beef makes decisions based on data, not a hunch. You cattle management software that's easy to use and allows you to simplify feeding, performance, and health data recording, all from the chute side, or maybe you're out in the pen or at the pasture. Find out more at performancelivestockanalytics.com. And Tank Toad, your remote water monitoring from the convenience of your phone, powered by solar, satellite, and cell. You can keep an eye on your water supply with a daily text message. Call Meadowlark Solutions today for tank monitors, well controllers, generators, and more at 801-252-6135 or on their website at tanktoad.com. Well, let's check in now with the captain, Tim O'Byrne, publisher and editor of Working Ranch Magazine, for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Radioland. Justin, it's no secret that any chance I get, I go into these big grocery stores and straight to the meat case and start prowling around in there and poking around and asking questions and taking pictures. And actually, this one really kind of shocked me. Christine brought it to my attention. She said, you got to go back to this store. I'm not going to mention the name of it, and check this out. And I did that. And I got to tell you, it was shocking. They had a big ground beef case, said ground beef right on it, about 6 feet tall, 6 feet wide, had about 5 or 6 shelves on it. Lots of good ground beef in there from all over the place. And in the middle of it was about dedicated a foot wide, on one shelf to this, whatever you call this fake meat product. And there it was, sitting right there in the middle of all the ground beef. And the worst part of it, you guys, is that one of them said beef on the packaging. It says BEEF, and like all caps. And I mean, if you just on first glance, you'd swear that it was a package of hamburger. And it is not right for them to do that. I took pictures of that, sent it up into some of the industry, our industry associates in the national cattle organizations to say, hey, this is what is happening at this great big retail chain, and it ain't right. And actually, I went back too and talked to the manager, and I said, come on, you can't have this in here like that. This is not beef. People are going to, think that it says beef on the package. They're going to grab it and go, and they're not getting what they paid for. And he said, I don't know why that's there. It's supposed to be in another section of the store. They had another area for it. I don't know. I think they just maybe they're so desperate to get rid of the stuff, they threw it in with the ground beef. But by labeling it beef is dead wrong, and I don't like it. That's my 2 cents. Let's do something about it.
All right. Thanks, Captain. I agree. Just a couple thoughts as you were talking about that. Yeah, it seems a little bit deceptive to be throwing those manufactured products into the beef case. And the second thought would be maybe that it would be better off if they were over in the vegetable aisle. Just a thought there. Well, folks, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, Denise Loining with LBRW Cattle Company will be joining us as we're going to talk about the software platform they're using to be efficient in growing out and raising of their bulls for their annual bull sale. And then, of course, later on, RMA Administrator Marcia Bunger will be joining us to talk about the new tool coming out through RMA for cow-calf producers. We got a lot to cover on today's show. Stick with us. This is the Working Ranch Radio Show.
There are lots of nutrition tubs out there, but none can match the True Blue commitment of Vitalix. Our tubs offer you the most concentrated nutrition at the lowest cost per day. That means more profit for your operation and improved performance for your cow herd. In fact, research shows Vitalix tubs increase feed efficiency by 20%, while boosting conception rates, herd health, and weaning weights. Learn more at Vitalix.com. Vitalix, the true blue tub.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. Justin Mills here with you as we continue to see technology playing more and more of a role in our industry. I know for some folks, when I say that, you might think, well, we're really losing out on some of the traditional components of ranching. I don't necessarily believe so. I think what we're seeing and what I feel as a real place for technology is the ability to help us make management decisions just a little bit quicker with a little less hassle. For example, instead of some long drawn out spreadsheets or notes written on scratch pieces of paper or the kitchen napkin on the kitchen table there, we can do this now through some software that's available that can help us in making some management decisions. We're going to talk about that here today. So I'm pleased to have joining with us Denise Loining, and her husband Carl have LBRW Cattle Company. They're out of Absaroka, Montana. And Denise, before we get started, first of all, thanks for joining us here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Well, thanks for having me. We sure appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. So, yeah, looking forward to it.
I kind of laughed a little bit when I introduced you. Not that I was laughing at you, but partly because I'm catching you out in the corral right now as you guys are fall calving. And in fact, we had to take, just before we went on air, you were giving instructions to somebody about a cow to go get them tagged. And you were explaining to me how fall calving is just a little bit different. The temperament of the cattle are a little bit different than they are in wintertime calving.
They are. We strictly do a embryo transfer program in the fall. So we're typically a spring calving herd, but we decided here a couple years ago that there is a market for 18-month-old bulls. Mm-hmm. So any of our open females, we put embryos in them in the fall. So it's just our third year of doing this, and we have definitely found that the calves are much quicker after birth on their feet, and you've got to be pretty quick to get them tagged and processed. And then the cows just also take on a little different temperament. And I don't know if it's just, it's just a little warmer. They're just on green grass. So yeah, it's been an experience for us.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, fall calving is pretty dang nice.
Yeah, I can imagine compared to spring and having to deal with those spring storms. You run a registered Hereford operation in Absaroka, Montana. And as you guys have done this, we're going to be talking about your utilization of Performance Beef, a software that has helped you guys. We're going to get into the benefits of where you have found in some of that. But first of all, as you were looking at your operation, what were some of the things that drove you to say, we need to have a little bit more management in our data so that we can utilize that and make some business decisions? So what was kind of the background as going through your mind in all this?
So real quick, we're fairly new. We're fledgling seed stock producers, if you will. I mean, we're not 50 years into this deal. We're just having our 8th production sale here coming up in the spring. So we had to kind of start from scratch, really, and how to best, develop our bulls and develop a management style that works for us and our environment. And then obviously what the industry is looking for when they come to us to purchase genetics. And I've always been a firm believer that data is knowledge. Mm-hmm. The more information you have at your fingertips, the better you can make decisions, moving forward. You look at these operations that are in their 50th year or whatnot, they've had great-grandparents, grandparents that have kind of gone through the motions of making those decisions and fine-tuning an operation. So we've been a little fortunate that we get to utilize the technology that is available to us to help make some of those decisions and help us, I think, advance us maybe a little quicker in some of our management decisions. Mm-hmm. So when we first started, we're just trying things, trying to figure out what's going to be the best. How can we meet our development goals on the bulls? Everything was being hand calculated as far as our rations. The guys were sitting in the tractor figuring out based on bunk score, how much they needed to adjust their ration for the bulls that day. And I just got to looking at that and thinking there's got to be a better way to do this. And we just really hadn't found the better way, but we just kind of kept thinking that, we've got to find something different because there's always that margin of human error. Nobody is perfect. Yeah. You hit the wrong number on the calculator, you add up the wrong column. It mm-hmm. happens. We're human. And so we've always been striving to figure out how to make things better. That's just kind of been our goal starting this. How can we make something better? And that's why we started looking into these platforms for, feed and feedlot management, I guess, or development management.
Mm-hmm. So then the software that you found that would work with what you guys were wanting to do, that would get the results that you wanted out of a management software, was Performance Beef. Let's go back a little bit. You talked about some of the manual things you were doing. Let's get specifically into some of those areas from your operation and the areas of use that you're finding Performance Beef you can incorporate that into.
So the manual side of things that we were having to manage is inventory, like mm-hmm. our development pellet, our concentrate. So we were having to, manually look at those products to make sure, do we need to order any? We set up a spreadsheet for everybody that's feeding the bulls and the heifers. And, so there's a spreadsheet that you go back to every day and you calculate how much corn needs to go in, how much pellet needs to go in, what's your dry matter, and what's your water. So all of that had to be calculated by hand every single day from September till April, really, till the bulls leave to go to their new homes. So it was time consuming for that person that was, going to clean bunks, kind of estimating, what the bulls didn't clean up or what the heifers didn't clean up, and then to manually adjust that ration. Because you have to feed and develop your bulls according to what the bunk is telling you. Mm-hmm. So you have to so our guys were having to make that manual adjustment on a daily basis by hand. And when your inputs, especially on the seed stock end of things, are it's not costly, but there's a lot more input dollar amount to develop a bull than just a commercial calf. Mm-hmm. So when you look at your price of your pellet, price of your concentrate, and a 100-pound error every day, that essentially equals a lot of money. And so in this day and age, when your break-even point is so slim, mm-hmm. that it's really imperative that you are able to track that and to keep a little better handle on that. And so just taking out that human error process, I think, is what really drove us to mm-hmm. To fine tuning and getting into something that's an online platform.
Mm-hmm. So from the feed standpoint, there's areas of use there. Any other areas that Performance Beef or you're able to analyze or track records?
Yeah, so with the performance beef, you can allow access for your veterinarian to have access to your feed records or to your feeding program. Your nutritionist can look on the backside. So the one thing too that intrigued me when I first is like, okay, let's say we have a health outbreak, that's plausible.
Mm-hmm.
What if we got a new batch of corn in that, it might have tested okay, but now all of a sudden we've got, some stuff coming through the bulls. Our vet can come in and look at the backside of that, and we can pinpoint, okay, so we had a new batch of corn delivered, or we had a new batch of pellet. This is the symptoms they've got going on. Let's see when that started happening. So they're allowed to come in on the backside and analyze stuff if you have a health outbreak, something in the feed that might have changed, where, to kind of hone in on where to start looking for the problem or where to start looking as to how do we need to mitigate this. Mm-hmm. Same with your nutritionist. They can come in on the backside at any point in time and see what the bulls are doing or the replacement females are doing as far as feed. If we're not gaining like we should, they can come in and look at that and be like, okay, so maybe we need to adjust the dry matter side of the ration. Let's bring down the concentrate. So it allows our team, if you will, to have a really good picture of what's happening in this development season of these bulls. Mm-hmm. So that's another key factor why we wanted to be part of that, is it gives more insight as to, okay, so you got a health problem. How do we fix it? The bulls aren't gaining. So what can we look at the data that's telling us why? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So just a lot of information that I think, because this is a team effort. When you're in this business and you're developing bulls, it's a team effort between your nutritionist, your staff, your veterinarian, everybody, to help get these bulls started on the right track and to keep them gaining so you can meet your financial goals, you can meet your development goals.
Yeah. Denise, you mentioned that, you guys were fairly new in the seed stock business. I mean, you've been at it a while, though I wouldn't say you're relatively new, and you've been in the industry long enough to know in ranching. When you look at what Performance Beef is doing for you all and understanding that platform out there from a data standpoint, what other types of ranching businesses do you see it working for?
So when we first learned about Performance Beef, it was through a veterinarian client workshop sponsored by Zoetis in Red Lodge. I think it must have been back in 2019. And their original platform, I think, or who they were kind of targeting at that point, was more of the feedlot, like those types of operations where they're, bringing in those steers or feeding heifers and then they're going out. But I knew at that time, I'm like, we can make this work on the seed stock side of things. And so we worked really closely with their representative that was here in our area, and we were able to utilize that program in a seed stock situation. Mm-hmm. I don't think that that's originally where it was designed, because this company was, I believe, more in the Midwest, and it hadn't kind of ventured out into the West yet. So, but I think it can work for anybody, to be honest. I mean, it's just a great program. It just really allows a person to understand exactly what's going into your cattle, whether it's a cow-calf operation or a seed stock, whether your background in calves for somebody. So there's just a lot of good benefits. And when our profit margins, as everybody knows in this industry, is so tight, to be able to get a handle on your true input costs, that's key. That's a make or break deal, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think as we kind of conclude this up, it's a good point that it really comes down to, we have to know what our costs are. That's essentially what this is coming down to. And as you're talking here today, that's kind of what you're getting at, is this is that mechanism, this is that platform that allows you to make these decisions and know that you're not putting more in than you're getting out.
Right. And I think that's one thing, is one thing that we realized, we always kind of had an idea of what it costs for us to develop a bull. Mm-hmm. You kind of have that number, but the reports that you can generate on the backside, whether it's monthly, quarterly, whatever, it's going to break down exactly how much these critters are costing us to develop. So, so that really makes you understand, especially on the seed stock side of things, is, you got to put a value on that calf if you were to sell him in the fall as a steer. And then, let's just say your input cost is $1,200 to get him through development plus your sale expenses. You can take a look at that calf and be like, you know what, is he really going to, bring us $4,000 at our sale? Or is he better off that we just send him to town in the fall? Mm-hmm. It really makes a person think about that. And then we can track our meds. Mm-hmm. So when we're processing cattle, you can enter in like your repeats that you might have treated for pneumonia or foot rot or something. It can track all of that. So as you're, looking at stuff and you're like, oh, he's a 3-peat refender for pneumonia. You know what? I think he just needs to go to town. Yeah. So there's just, it just gives, and all that information is at your fingertips. Mm-hmm. So this platform it's on an Apple platform. So I can have it on my phone. The guys have it on their phones. The iPad stays with the feed tractor. And I get reports at the end of the day because we develop our bulls at a separate location than the home place. And so I get a report at the end of the day that tells me exactly what the bulls were fed that day, the replacement females, anything that is within the system, it tells me at the end of the day. And it sends me inventory shortages. So we're not manually looking if the guys forget to tell me, oh, hey, we got 5 days left to pellet. Yeah. I put, which happens. We all get busy. It's the middle of January. We're calving. We're trying to picture bulls and clip bulls, and somebody forgets. Well, I set up my warnings to a certain level. So say I want a 2-ton warning, it'll tell me, one of your inventories is, at or below your warning. Mm-hmm. And then that's like, oh, I better get pellet ordered, whatever. So it's just helped us a lot to be more efficient.
You bet. All right. Well, Denise, I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy fall calving schedule to visit with us about performance beef, and wish you and Carl and everybody there at Elbar W Cattle Company in Absaroka, Montana, the best here as we move into the fall of the year.
Well, we sure appreciate the opportunity, and you as well have a great fall. And I think it's going to be a good fall for everybody. Well, so again, thank you very much.
You bet. And again, if you're wanting more information about Performance Beef, you can go to their website at performancelivestockanalytics.com. Find out more there. And speaking of websites, if you're needing some good Hereford bulls, I can tell you March 8th of 2024, Elbar W Cattle Company will be having their sale. You can check their sale catalog out and their information on their website at elbarw.com. Well, stay with us. Coming up next, RMA Administrator Marcia Munger will be joining us as we talk about this new tool coming out for cow-calf producers through the RMA. We'll be back on the Working Ranch Radio Show after this.
Animal health is key to your business, so how do you track cattle health treatments? Stop relying on pen and paper or complicated programs. Performance Beef helps you record processing data, enter costs, and track animal health history, all in real time at the chute. The mobile app also makes it easy to log pasture and pen treatments on the go. Your health data is integrated with feed and financial information in one easy-to-use platform, accessible from your computer, smartphone, or tablet. Find Performance Beef online to request a demo.
And welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. As I don't know if you had an opportunity to catch it or not, but just here the last part of September, the USDA Risk Management Agency unveiled a new program coming out called the Weaned Calf Risk Protection Program. And I'm pleased to have joining us today on our program none other than the administrator for the Risk Management Agency, Miss Marcia Munger. And Marcia, thanks for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thank you so much, Justin, for having me.
Well, before we went on air, we were kind of visiting a little bit. You're in South Dakota. I'm in Wyoming here, and we were talking a little bit about that. And I know we want to talk about the program first and foremost that's being rolled out, but I also think it's important for people to know that are listening in on this show. I'm not just talking to somebody that doesn't really have the knowledge of what it means to be a working ranch operation, farming operation. You're on a 5th generation outfit there in South Dakota, you yourself and your husband, your family, you guys have been doing this for quite some time. So I'm talking to somebody here today, folks, you need to know that knows agriculture, and that's what I appreciate about you.
Well, thank you so much for those kind words. And definitely, I think it's important that we have people in these positions that have the experience, have been the boots on the ground. And so it has been very helpful to me in this role, working not only for the Farm Service Agency, but also a crop insurance agent, but most importantly, as an ag producer myself with my husband. I'm very excited about this pilot of the weaned calf that we're rolling out. My husband and I do have a cow-calf operation that we've been doing, since we first got married. We've had cows, and that was back starting in 1982.
All right. Well, Marcia, again, I'm glad to have you here on the program and excited for you to be on to talk about this pilot program called the Weaned Calf Risk Protection Program that's out for a lot of us as ranchers with dealing with risk management agency or knowing what they do. A lot of us have been familiar with LRPs or the PRFs, but nevertheless, this is a new pilot program. We'll get into where that's going to be made available. But first of all, give us the details of basically what brought this about and what its purpose and intent is for ranchers.
Definitely. RMA continues to look at ways to address risk management, not only with crops, but with livestock. And we do have a number of products already that are available, but I think this is just in addition to the livestock revenue protection program that is already in existence. And so it has now opened up the doors, I think, for weaned cow-calf producers so that they're able to protect their commodity in events of weather, and so the actual policy itself is an actual production history policy that ensures producers against yield losses due to natural causes such as drought, excessive moisture, hail, wind, frost, insects, and disease. In the case of the new weaned calf protection coverage, it's being provided both with regards to yield loss with weights, but also a decline in price. And so we've kind of coupled those two together. And a lot of this has been through feedback from ranchers. I think it's important to note that RMA has an incredible staff on board. We're small in agency size, but our footprint is pretty large out in the country because probably all told with approved insurance providers and agents and RMA staff, we probably are looking at close to 13,000 folks that are involved in all of this. But this is a private submission brought on board through the 508H process that Congress stood up a number of years ago to allow private industry to come through the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation Board to introduce new and innovative products. And I think this is exactly what that is. It's innovative, and I'm excited to see the progress this next year with, right now, there's been quite a bit of interest. So hopefully folks will take advantage and start to talk to their crop insurance agent in the areas that it's being offered.
Yeah. And I really have seen a lot of interest in LRPs and producers looking at that in the last 2 to 3 years. At least definitely a lot more crop insurance providers providing that service has really picked up as well, and trying to get that information out so that producers are aware of just what is available and what they can do to insure against events that could be devastating to a ranching operation. Now, as we had mentioned before, this Weaned Calf Risk Protection Program, it's a pilot program. So let's talk about what states it will be made available with as it kicks off to start.
Certainly. So the pilot is going to be introduced for livestock producers in Colorado, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Texas. And so that's where we're going to start. We're going to have a smaller, pilot, although some of these states are large in size. But I think that's always the best way, is to take a look at how this is going to work, get feedback, hear from livestock producers, how they thought it worked, so that we can evolve the policy and hopefully expand it into other states in the coming years.
Yeah. Do you have any idea, like with the time frame on when that would happen expansion wise? I know a lot of it's probably going to be determined on how the pilot goes, but do you kind of have a timeline in place?
Currently, there is no timeline in place because this is a privately held product that is at the discretion of the submitter. And so depending upon the experience we realize this next year, we'll make adjustments with their recommendations and then go from there. I think LRP probably very similarly was introduced that way, and we want to get it right. And so as far as a timeline, unfortunately, I don't have an answer to that. I just need those in the states that are part of the pilot to take a look at it, use it if it applies, and give the valuable feedback that we're going to need.
And you had mentioned that there is a private side of this, which basically means it is through a crop insurance agent that you would contact them to purchase this insurance, much like similarly they do if they're interested in LRPs or some of the other RMA programs that are available out there. Will the current ones that already are up and rolling with the current programs, will they automatically be able to have this available, or what's kind of that stance? Is there some training involved that they'd have to do, and will it be available through pretty much the same ones that are offering the other RMA programs?
Typically, they will offer it. So there will be a time in the next couple of months where they'll need to do training. So the approved insurance providers, the companies, will develop training, and they will also develop software and then bring in crop insurance agents. And it'll probably be those that are already selling LRP, although it's not limited to just those agents, but to provide the training that is necessary to then turn around and sell and service the policy to livestock growers.
So what was the catalyst that brought this program to fruition? Because I do see it being valuable in the fact that the current LRP does a good job of handling feeders and the stockers, but there's that gap in there between those two classes of cattle. So what was it that brought this to a point of building a pilot program to get rolled out and hopefully bringing it to the rest of the country at some point?
I think it's probably a couple of things. I think it's input from industry. It's input from livestock growers. I also think, just like you said, there was a gap. When we look at South Dakota as an example, on the eastern side of the state, we have feed. And so you have the ability to feed out your cattle, whereas in the western part of the state, it's pretty much cow-calf. And so it was a gap that we saw, and fortunately, a private submitter was able to formulate a policy and bring it through the FCIC board for us to take a look at. Nothing happens real quickly. It's usually about a 2 to 3 year process. So there has been some work being done on this for a while now.
Well, and we've definitely seen some storm or weather catastrophes that have been pretty dramatic for especially this class of cattle. Really, we're just coming out of, as you had mentioned, as we talked about, you're out of South Dakota, and I just was recollecting in a previous show that we had here and reading the account of somebody that had went through the storm Atlas, and that happened 10 years ago almost now. Earlier than now. So it is definitely a class of cattle, targeting a class of cattle that we hadn't in the past. I want to get back just in general for Risk Management Agency as a whole, because really, as I had mentioned, we are seeing a lot of interest in LRPs and the PRF and those, when we look at the ranching side of things, that continues to really be growing.
Definitely. When you look at the total acres insured under PRF, it totals more than all of the corn, soybean, and wheat acres that are insured in this country today. The LRP program now has reached up into the top 10 for most policies sold. So it just continues to grow. I feel that this product, the weaned calf product, we're also going to see a lot of interest, and I'm crossing my fingers that we'll continue to see growth and that we'll be able to expand.
You bet. And I think there probably will be. We've had several shows here where we've talked about LRPs and getting that information and that word out to folks as looking at that as a mechanism to have some protection in that. And I really think, not to downplay the cattle market in terms of the Chicago board and some of those kinds of things, but I think some folks have found the LRPs are easy to understand, easy to use, and much like they are, I'm guessing the weaned calf risk protection program is going to be fairly simple to understand as well.
I believe so. I think it will be. So I just encourage listeners to get a hold of their crop insurance agent. The deadline to purchase for the 2024 year is January 31st. Agents will be getting training here probably in the next 4 to 6 weeks. So they may not be able to answer a lot of questions up front, but that is your best source, and that's where you need to start first if you would like to look at purchasing weaned calf.
All right. Well, Marsha, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know it just rolled out here a week or so ago, and your office contacted me about just getting this information out, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Have a great day.
Thank you. Again, Marsha Bunger, who is the administrator for the Risk Management Agency, joining us here today on the program, talking about the unveiling of the pilot program called the Weaned Calf Risk Protection Program. No doubt hitting a class of cattle that really hasn't probably had the best protection or coverage through their previous programs as well. And it is a pilot program. As she was saying, it's going to be made available first in the states of Colorado, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Texas. So if you're in those states, or if you have cattle located in those states, don't be afraid to get a hold of your local crop insurance agent. They are the ones that it would be made available through. And also, if you have more questions or want to find out more about it, you can go to the RMA's website as well. It's rma.usda.gov, and you can find more information there on this new pilot program called the Weaned Calf Risk Protection Program. Well, stay with us. We'll have more on the Working Ranch Radio Show after this.
There are lots of nutrition tubs out there, but none can match the true blue commitment of Vitalix. Our tubs offer you the most concentrated nutrition at the lowest cost per day. That means more profit for your operation and improved performance for your cow herd. In fact, research shows Vitalix tubs increase feed efficiency by 20%, while boosting conception rates, herd health, and weaning weights. Learn more at Vitalix.com. Vitalix, the true blue tub.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm going to do something in this segment that I can honestly say I really have never done since I've hosted the Working Ranch Radio Show, and that is spend a little time in this segment to go back and look at the markets and look at how things got started for the month of October. As we've indicated on previous shows, it is kind of the start of that fall run, so we're going to spend some time here today to look and see how that got started. If you remember, just a few weeks ago, we had Clint Berry on with Superior Livestock joining us as he gave us his outlook on what he expected that fall run to look like. And of course, since that time, there have really been some major news developments that's taken place as well. Both internationally, of course, what's going on in Israel is really dominating the news and weighing on a lot of folks' minds out there as far as how that's going to play out. Domestically, we continue to see the southern border be an issue, in addition to some of the dysfunction that's going on in Washington, D.C. So all of these things, I think, are issues that I don't know in a way that they've really affected our cattle markets the start of October particularly, but they are issues nevertheless to be thinking about. So when we look at that, I wanted to take this time here again today to spend some time looking at how this thing is getting started for our 2023 fall run. What I always ask to Clint Berry, or so anybody that's on the show where we're talking cattle markets, is really I always want to drill down too in terms of what are the things that we as producers are doing, some of the input costs that we're doing, such as preconditioning or weaning or those kinds of things. Are they paying off? And I think when we look at some of the market reports that we get from the USDA's National Feeder and Stocker Cattle Summary, by all accounts, it's definitely indicating that we are seeing a good demand for those calves that have at least 2 rounds of vaccinations and that they're going to be trucked and commingled with other cattle. These buyers are wanting good vaccination programs and a strong respiratory protocol as part of that. They find the value in that, and it looks as though they're willing to pay for that, especially when you look against some of these planer type calves, some of those coming right off the cow, unweaned, unworked, that those calves are actually seeing a bit of a discount in there. So I think it's giving us some indication. If you're sitting on the fence right now, you got a set of calves, you're not quite sure what to do with them, maybe you want to consider that process of, if you haven't preconditioning, getting those round of shots in those calves, and then also at the same time maybe looking at weaning. Of course, the ability to do that could be different for other folks. If you're in a part of the country that's had a lot of feed feed, then and it's cheaper for you, then of course it makes sense to do that. If you're a part of the country where it's been droughty, maybe it doesn't work for you. And to each his own on that one. You have to figure that out and pencil that out on your own. But when we look at this, I think it's interesting to note when we base this off of where the market was last at where we're at here to now. In fact, to be honest with you, we're actually higher than the last high that we saw in the market, which was around that 2014 and 15 mark. We're already seeing our markets surpassing that just now. And by all accounts, again, the fundamentals would speak to the fact that we're going to see these markets continue to move higher. However, as we started the fall run of October 2023, we did see the markets maybe drop just a little bit, but really not as many cattle going through. Of course, we know that because we know the fact that the U.S. cattle herd is down a little bit as well. So we do see these markets, the cattle numbers down just a little bit. And of course, that always in the long run should create some demand and should create some strength in this market. I want to go through here region by region, some of these calf prices and feeder cattle prices as well. I know that things can change and are going to be picking up a little bit, but I think if anything gives you some trends, and as we look at these, I think it's interesting to look at where we're at, where we're at now versus where we were at a year ago and where we were at 5 years ago in these markets as well. So we're going to start at some of these feeder steers at around a 700 to 800 weight, which I realize, folks, that is a big gap. And I honestly hate really giving prices on gaps that big because there's a big difference between a 700-pound steer and an 800-pound steer. But nevertheless, just information here that we have from the USDA on this. And when we look at 700 to 800-pound steers, and these steers coming out of north central areas, which would include the Dakotas, Iowa, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, and Wyoming, the average on those steers, 700-800-pound steers, was $2.65 per hundredweight. A year ago, that was $1.89, and 5 years ago, that was $1.67. So we're about $1 higher on that than we were a year ago, and I think you're going to see that range $1 higher than we were 5 years ago across all of these. When we look down here in the south central area of Arkansas, Colorado, Kansas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas on these 7 to 8 weights, the average price there was $2.52, so just about looks like about 13 cents lower than where we were in the north central. When we look at southeast average of Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Virginia, that average price at about $2.32 a year or 5 years ago, that price was $1.49 per hundredweight on those 7 to 8 weight steers. And finally, when we look into the western areas of the country, Arizona, California, Idaho, Nevada, Oregon, Utah, and Washington, average price on those at $2.50 per hundredweight. A year ago, that was $1.80, and 5 years ago, that was $1.57 per hundredweight. So definitely, as we're continuing to see that trend and that gap's pretty much about the same, just around at least $1 gap than where we were at 5 years ago. Now let's take a look at where these stocker steers are at, because that's again probably a majority of where everybody's looking at right now with what's available and what they have on hand. When we look at these 500 to 600 pound steers, again, a big gap that I really don't like to give a lot of information on, nevertheless, because there's a big difference between a 500-600 pound steer. Nevertheless, when we look at the north central area average, again, that areas of Dakota, the Dakotas, Iowa, and Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, and Wyoming. Average price on these 5 to 6 weight feeder steers were $3 per hundredweight. A year ago, they were $2.09, and 5 years ago, that was $1.92. So boy, oh boy, I'll tell you what, look at the gap in that versus where we were at 5 years ago. In the north central area of Arkansas, south central area of Arkansas, Colorado, Kansas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas, average price on these 5 to 6 weight feeder steers, $2.84 per hundredweight. 5 years ago, that was $1.83, so $1 better than they were 5 years ago. In southeastern part of the country, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Virginia, 5 to 6 weight feeder steers averaging $2.54 per hundredweight. A year ago, $1.73. 5 years ago, $1.70. And in the western part of the country, Arizona, California, Idaho, Nevada, Oregon, Utah, and Washington, that average on these 5 to 6 weight feeders, $2.92 per hundredweight, $1.98 a year ago, and $1.83 5 years ago. So we continue to see at least around that dollar gap from a year ago and a little over that on 5 year ago prices that's good news. That is definitely good news on these feeder cattle that we're seeing. Again, a lighter run a bit to start the month of October. That's not always unprecedented by no means, and we'll continue to see that pick up. Now, one of the other things when we looked and we're talking a bit ago about the value that these buyers are willing to pay for weaned calves, well, then we start looking at the weather, because that definitely plays into it as well. And for many parts of the country where it's been a little bit milder, we've seen hot days, cool nights, and that big gap in there is not always a good thing to be weaning calves in. So as we start to see this weather changing a bit and cooling off a bit, probably see a little bit more favorable to weaning conditions. Not really wanting a lot of moisture to some extent. Moisture is definitely a two-edged sword on this deal, because moisture is good for later on down the road, but it's at the same time, don't really like to see that stress that it can put on these cattle as they're both being weaned, and then later on maybe some of these that are going to be showing up on the feed yards or wherever they may end up after they leave the home places. Nevertheless, it does look like that the market is continuing to stay pretty strong. Again, wanting to reiterate the fact that it looks like these buyers are definitely interested in these calves that have been vaccinated, that have been weaned. But again, you got to pencil that out, make sure it's worth your time and effort in doing that in the conditions and whatever feed availability that you have. Now, just a couple final things before we head to break, and that is, if you do plan on taking some calves to the sale barn, don't forget to have your shot information. Fill out that shot sheet information that tells what they had at branding time, if you did any preconditioning shots, also if they've been weaned, how many days they've been weaned. Have as much of that information as available as possible. I think you're absolutely leaving money on the table if you go to all that work of vaccinating calves, weaning calves, and then when those calves cross the sale barn floor, nobody knows what has happened with them. The auctioneer doesn't have anything to say about them. So make sure you take the time to get the shot sheets to the sale barn ahead of time with your calves. And of course, with that, get them consigned. If you know you're going to be headed to the sale barn, call them a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks ahead of time so they can get that information of your calves to the buyer database that they have, whether it's through their local radio station programs that they do, or maybe they have an email that they send out to buyers. But any of that information is good. Again, we got to help ourselves. We can't expect everything to just work for us. And I think these are some of the things that we can do as ranchers, as sellers, to help our product sell a little bit better. And I know these prices are going to be good this year, but we can help ourselves even a little bit more by having that information available and get it to that sale barn prior to our calves getting there. Well, stay with us. When we come back, we talked a little bit about weaning weather. Well, Don Day will be up next as we take a look at our long-term weather when we return on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Do you have a young child, grandchild, niece, or nephew that loves the weather and wants to learn more? Day Weather has produced a children's weather journal full of weather facts, fun weather experiments, coloring pages, and pages to record weather observations for every season of the year. The weather journal is for ages 3 to 7 and designed to be fun and educational. The interactive weather projects are fun for the whole family to take part in. For only $10, the Day Weather Journal is a great gift idea for any occasion. Click on our Amazon link to order at dayweather.com.
And welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. This is a look at our long-term weather, and joining us is meteorologist Don Day. Don, we were talking before we went on air that, and we'd even talked about it on previous shows, that we really did get quite a ways into the fall of the year before, at least for our neck of the woods, before we really saw some cold temperatures. However, this last storm that kind of went through dropped quite a bit of moisture in our country and higher elevations, some snow, and we did get down into some colder temperatures, but it really is kind of prolonged later than it typically would be on a normal year.
Yeah, most of the nation has enjoyed a pretty decent fall. There's been some heavy rain episodes like what we have just witnessed in the plain states in the upper Midwest and the Northwest Corn Belt, and parts of New England have seen some heavy rain. But through the month of September and into October, we haven't had a lot of weather. Temperatures have been comfortable. We haven't had a big blast of Arctic air come in early. And while we did have some tropical storm and hurricane activity early in the hurricane season, it's been fairly quiet here recently. But now we're starting to see our fortunes change a little bit. And when you look at the calendar, you say, yeah, well, it's about time you would expect it. Those days getting so much shorter and those nights longer in those northern latitudes. That's one thing you can't beat. You can't beat the earth tilting away from the sun this time of year. That just takes over.
Yeah, that's going to happen no matter what. You talked about a lot of moisture falling across the northern tier of the country, and I guess my thought initially, I know for a lot of us that are cow-calf guys, we're in the middle of, there's the fall run going on and guys are moving cattle, but then the other side of this is the feed side of the business, and that is how much of that moisture do you think are we going to see some big delays in that harvest of the corn crop in the Midwest?
Well, they've had really good harvest weather so far, and at least for the large part of the Corn Belt, this recent rain mainly got into those northern and northwest areas that I think it's going to be enough to keep folks out of the field for a few days. But I don't see another one that looks as wet that would really log jam things up in terms of the harvest. Mm-hmm. So while this is going to cause some delays, I think there's going to be a lot of benefits from this moisture. One thing that I know folks have been talking about is the low levels on the Missouri and Mississippi River systems, kind of slowing down trade a little bit there. This rain is going to help with those river levels. So yeah, while there's going to be delays, I don't think it's going to be a backbreak or anything that'll be too much of a problem.
Mm-hmm. So with the last weather pattern that we've seen, it's been a wave pattern of, we have a few good days, warmer days, then a few days of some sort of a storm, and then back to some warmer days. Is that the pattern we're going to continue to see, or will we get into a stretch where we see maybe a couple week run of some nicer weather, or a prolonged moisture type pattern?
I think what we're going to see here in the next 7 to 10 days is a repeat of what we just have been seeing. We get a storm and a front move through a large part of the nation. You have some weather with it. Then you have several days of nice autumn weather. And that's exactly what I'm seeing. Mm-hmm. But after that, one thing we're seeing on our long range charts is some things going on in the northern and eastern Pacific, which is a colder signal, especially for the central and parts of the western United States. So I think as we get closer to that Halloween timeframe, early November, I see overall for a lot of the U.S. a colder trend, a trend that's going to be reminiscent of, maybe winter is off to an early start. That is a signal that we're getting more confident at seeing. So another 7 to 10 days of where we've been. Then after that, it looks a little more wintry towards that end of the month and into the first half of November.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we've talked a little bit with some of this weather that we've been seeing has really probably been more on the northern tier a bit. I mean, it's been far as south as into Colorado and everything, but what about in the southwest and the southern central part of the country?
Well, in the southwest, if you go into the desert southwest, central southern California, then across into New Mexico and into Texas across the southern plains, the precipitation really has not been abundant at all. Now, some of New Mexico, some of Texas has gotten some rain a little bit, but the better rain and what we saw here over the last several days has been in the southeast. The southeast areas, the lower delta, those areas have been more wet. So we are still dry in parts of those southern plains, Oklahoma, Texas, and the southwestern United States. However, this is not the time of year when we would expect to be wet in those areas. But with this change in the weather I talked about earlier, late October into November, their fortunes for precipitation will go up.
All right. Well, Don, thanks for joining us here again, giving us a look at what our weather's going to look like here as we approach the latter half of October.
Sure thing.
And again, that is meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. You can go to his website at dayweather.com and find a link to his YouTube channel where he's there each and every morning with a look at the long-term weather. Well, stay with us. Coming up after the break, I'll tell you what's in store for next week's show. We'll be back on the Working Ranch Radio Show after this. Coming up next week, we're pleased to have back Mary Jo Ehrman. Of course, she wrote the book Farming Without the Bank. This time, though, we're going to be talking about just some warnings or some things that she offers for us to consider here in the ranching industry in consideration of the financial picture that we see out there. A great show you will not want to miss next week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Thanks to our sponsors here today, Vitalix, Performance Beef, and Tank Toad. Well, the Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine magazine, branded #1 by America's ranchers. The captain is working on the next issue of Working Ranch magazine, and if you want that to be in your mailbox when it kicks out, you can go to their website at workingranchmag.com and start your subscription today. Well, if you'd like to get a hold of me, maybe you have a question or a show topic you'd like us to cover, please feel free to reach out to me. My email address is justin.workingranch@gmail.com, or you can text me at 307-363-COWS. Be sure to join us right here at same place, same time next week, or on your favorite podcast provider. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.